If you have a true strange or scary story you'd like to send into the channel, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. Also, today's video features my lovely other half, Marie's Field of Nightmares, aka Patience. Please consider giving her channel a look, a listen, as you will, and yeah, consider subscribing. She also just hit 2,000 subscribers, so congrats to her. I would like to share a story from when I was younger to hopefully not only teach others to be careful, but to let them know that things will get better. I'm an adult now, well into my 40s, and quite happy where I'm at. But my life wasn't always that way. My childhood was filled with plenty of stressful and hurtful days. I barely knew my dad, and he seemed to have no interest in getting to know me, and my mom just about put everyone and everything over me. It was normal for me to only eat at school. Thankfully, I got free meals, but I would often have to fend for myself at home. As I got older and had a voice for myself, my mother and I often got into fights. It's not like she tried to do right. She didn't work, she made money in other ways, but I rarely saw it regardless of how she earned it. The men that she was with rarely lasted long, but there was one guy that she liked to frequently bring home, and he gave me the creeps with how he would watch me. So when we got into a fight about him being in my room one day when I came home, I wasn't really surprised when she kicked me out, taking his side over me. I tried calling my dad, but he made up every excuse to not let me stay with him. So, there I was, at the age of 17, kicked out and homeless. Now, of course, hindsight is 20/20, and I'm sure some people might have taken me in if I talked about it, but unfortunately, in my already fragile mind, I didn't talk much to the few friends I had about my situation. I didn't want to burden someone else or have them pity me. I enjoyed my time with my friends because it was an escape. It made me feel like my life was normal and I didn't have to focus on it. So, instead, I went to school as normal. I stayed at various friends' houses on the weekends and would shower there, but at night, I floated around a lot and found myself couch surfing at almost complete strangers' houses. I wasn't always lucky enough to find a home to stay at. Sometimes, I even stayed in abandoned or closed-up buildings. But I could at least find the silver lining in this. I grew to quite enjoy Urbex, and with my free time, I would often try to find new places to explore. At least it sounded cooler to say that I was exploring, rather than trying to find a place to sleep for the night. Mostly I found old houses that were boarded up, and clearly not being lived in. There was one place that I quite enjoyed because they left a lot behind, including an old journal or diary. I kept going there until I finished it because it was so well written. It was almost like a book, and I didn't want to put it down. But once I was finished, I left it there where it belonged, in its home. After all, I knew what it felt like to be ripped out of your home. When it started getting cooler at night, I tried to find better covered places to keep warm, as I was located near the coast of Florida. This is what led me to that position. I had walked past this building several times that I believed was an old clinic. Not sure if it was for people or a veterinarian clinic. There was a large sign out front showing it was for sale, and from what I could tell from the outside, it was definitely vacant. I wanted to try and get in to not only have a place to stay, but to also look around. Old clinics and hospitals were always a lot of fun to explore. Between the random tools or supplies that may have been left behind, and just exploring the rooms and imagining what may have occurred in them, it was always amusing to me. I waited until it was darker and then walked around the building, looking for the best way in. It wasn't going to be as easy as a back door to an old house, but at the same time, it kind of was. I prayed that there wasn't an alarm set on in the building, picked up a nearby decorative rock, and broke out one of the office windows. I carefully climbed in and noticed immediately that the heat was still on. It was nice, but also put me on edge, thinking there probably was an alarm and I needed to be ready to run. I looked around the room that I was in, and it still had a desk pushed to the corner with a cheap metal chair stacked on top of it. There was a shelf on the same wall with random papers and wires being held. I was surprised to see two thick cables on it which appeared to be some kind of power cord. While cell phones were a thing, smartphones certainly were not. But the plug-in told me this wasn't for a phone. I quickly wrapped them up and tossed them in my bag, hoping that whatever it was for, maybe I could make some cash off of it. That was about all that was in that room. So I opened the door and headed out of the room. It was clear walking down the hall that this place was pretty well gutted. The light covers had even been removed, leaving the bare halogen tubes. All the signs and photos that once hung on the wall were gone, leaving slightly discolored paint. There were a few small pieces of paper that were taped to random doors and walls with painter's tape that I can only describe as being some kind of worker's instructions. I walked over to what would have been the front desk and saw that there was still a nice chair behind it. I sat in the chair as I checked all the drawers, once again not finding much. There were a few stickers and coasters in the bottom drawer, a pen, a small notepad, and just some kind of lanyard. All in all, it wasn't too exciting at that point, but it was also a decent place to stay for the night. I ended up in another room, most likely an exam room, but it was filled with a lot of random stuff, including one of those exam beds you would sit on waiting for the doctor. The cushion was split open and the bottom looked damaged, which was probably why it was left behind. After putting some weight on it, and it's not collapsing under me, I decided to call that my bed for the night. I tried getting settled in, and with the wind-up flashlight that I had with me, tried reading some of the book that I had. But as I lay there, I started hearing a faint sound. A voice. It was very muffled, but I could definitely tell that it was someone talking. I was worried at first, thinking that it was probably the police, possibly being alerted to some kind of silent alarm. But going by my past experiences, they weren't very quiet about it. They always made their presence known, and very loudly at that. This person was clearly talking quietly like they didn't want to be heard. Maybe it was someone like myself, someone just looking for a place to stay, and normally I would just leave them be if so, but part of me said that I should go check it out, for both of our safety. So, I left the room that I was in, taking my backpack with me just in case, and I tried to make my way towards the voice. I could tell I was at the right room because I could clearly hear the voice now. They were still mumbling, so I couldn't make out what they were saying, but what I could understand was the loud crash. It made me jump in place, but then I peered into the room as the door wasn't closed all the way. There was a man standing in the room, alone. He would say something and then would swing the pole in his hand, smacking at whatever was in front of him. It looked like he had one of those IV stands. He was swinging it furiously at anything in the room, breaking it and watching it fly across the room. The only thing I was ever able to make sense of when he was screaming was, "It's all your fault." I stood there frozen in place and continued to watch. He lifted the pole over his head, took a deep breath, and then paused. I held my breath in that moment, worried that he knew I was there. Then, in a soft, almost inaudible voice, he says, "Don't worry, I don't want to hurt you. But it's best you get out of here before midnight, before he comes back." And with that, he took another deep breath, screamed, and the pole came crashing down on whatever was in front of him. I wasn't going to wait around to see what happened at midnight or who he was. I slowly stepped backwards and then ran to the lobby. I thought that I would try the front entrance this time, hoping maybe I could unlock it so that I didn't have to go through the window. But to my surprise, the door was actually cracked open slightly. I know it wasn't like that when I got there because I remember looking at it and thinking it was definitely going to be locked. Was it opened by the man I just saw? Or was there another person there with us? The thought of being alone with that guy was scary enough for me, but possibly two of them? That made it worse. Why did he seem so angry? What did he mean by "it's your fault"? And why was it so important that I be gone? To be honest, none of those questions were very important to me at the time. I slipped through the door and ran until my legs were about to give in. While nothing did happen to me that night, I still feel incredibly lucky. That man gave me a warning, but I had no idea why. I still wonder at times who he was referring to, the importance of the time, and how he even knew I was there, between the breaking and the screaming. I ended up going to a friend's place the next day, swallowing my pride, and finally telling them the truth about my life. From then on, I wasn't on the streets and things did get better. They weren't perfect, and still weren't easy, but I at least didn't have to explore to find a place to sleep. Now as an adult, I can do it for fun and be assured that I have real-life skills that keep me safe when I go through with it. Just keep in mind, if you are an explorer, that sometimes people aren't there for a hobby, and some may defend what little they have.
As a child, there was one house we lived in that I will always call home. My parents lived there when I was born, and we stayed there until I was 14. That was what I knew and all I knew. You figured out all the best hiding places. You knew where each creaky floorboard was to avoid being caught. You could walk through it with your eyes closed. That's how this home was for me. But sadly, my family was not immune to the housing crash. After my dad was laid off and had to accept a lower paying job, they could no longer afford our home, and the only thing we could do, much like many others, was to just leave it. I may have been 14, so while I understood not being able to afford things, it still hurt. I didn't want to leave. That was what I knew. Thankfully, we did stay close enough for me to stay in the same school district, but we definitely downsized. From there, we slowly moved more and more south until we eventually moved from Ohio to Kentucky. Over time, it got easier and I got used to the moving. Maybe it was because I never got attached to a place like I did with our first home, who knows. But then, things have a funny way of working out. My 10-year high school reunion was coming, and now that I was living in a different state, a few hours away, I wasn't intending on going. But then, I saw a girl from my class that I had a huge crush on reached out to me, asking if I was going to be there. She wanted to get together to catch up, and it just so happened that I was single at the time, so I jumped on the opportunity. I took the time off, told my parents I was going back to Ohio. No, I didn't live with them, but I still told them when I left town, and made plans to spend a few days up there. The reunion was fine. I reconnected with some old friends, and got to talk a lot with the girl I mentioned, Jessica. We made plans to meet up the next day, and I headed back to my hotel in a great state of mind, reminiscing about my childhood, when I got that itch to drive by my old house. I just wanted to see what it looked like nowadays, that was all. I was not expecting what I saw. The place still looked abandoned, or again, maybe? There were notices taped to the door, and the 2 big windows in the front were boarded up. It was definitely not being used. I parked in front of the house for several minutes, just looking it over and trying to imagine running around the front yard with my little brother. After sulking some, I got the stupid idea of checking it out from the inside. I didn't know who all still lived in the neighborhood, and I didn't want someone to call the cops, so I knew I couldn't just stay there and walk in. I drove over to the little gas station around the block, parked my car, and walked back. I walked along the sidewalk, down the driveway, and then quickly walked around the back, opening the gate with the rock trick I used as a kid. I don't know why, but I thought I would try the back door, not expecting it to just work, but it did. It wasn't locked, so I stepped in. There was certainly a flood of emotions as I stepped into what was the kitchen. All the hanging cabinets had been ripped from the walls, the wallpaper peeling where they once were. The cream-colored paint now looked gray in my flashlight with streaks of yellow running down the walls, most likely nicotine stains. I will mention that my parents didn't smoke. Everything had dust on it, but some had thicker layers than others, showing me what was possibly last touched or moved. I moved into the living room and saw the giant old entertainment center still in its place. The glass was broken out, but otherwise, it was still standing strong. Made sense. I remember my dad did not want to move that thing. The shiplap walls were starting to warp and splinter near the bottom base like they had gotten wet or damaged. But what I noticed the most in the living room was the smell. It was quite a stomach-churning stench. There was, of course, the smell of mold or mildew, which immediately made me grab my shirt to cover my face. But then there was another distinct smell. It was almost like something rotting, but I couldn't quite determine what it was. At first, I just chalked it up to being the house in general. It pretty clearly had been sitting empty for a while, so who knows what had been left behind and left out to spoil and decay. I told myself I needed to leave, but I couldn't go without first seeing my bedroom. So I walked down the right hall and slowly opened the door. To my surprise, it was the least damaged room. It was empty, as I didn't leave one thing behind of mine, but there was a small pile of what I think was clothing in the corner of the room. I sat in the middle of the floor, again, just taking in the moment before I finally said it was time to go, if not because of the smell alone. As I started to leave, however, I remembered my secrets in my closet. Sometimes I would hide in there and write or draw on the inner wall. It was the one place my parents never looked, so I didn't get in trouble for writing on them. I wanted to revisit my old handiwork, knowing if the house was in this condition, it probably hadn't been painted over. I held my phone with my light on in one hand and pulled open the closet doors with the other. I didn't get to see my old artwork. Instead, crumpled up on the closet floor, I saw a body. By the state of it, they had been dead for some time, which made me realize what that smell was that still lingered in the air. I immediately ran out of the house and got sick in the yard. I had been walking through the house and sat in the same room of a corpse for at least half an hour. That's all I could smell. That's all I could see. Once I gathered myself, yes, I did call the police. I won't say I wasn't scared about getting in trouble myself, because I definitely was. My story didn't sound suspicious at all. Yes, I just came to check out my old abandoned home and found the body, I swear. I would probably think they were suspicious too. I waited at the end of the driveway until police showed up, and I explained to them exactly why I was there and everything I did, everything I touched, and what I saw. They went in, and I slowly saw a few more cars and a coroner van show up. The neighbors across the street ended up watching from their porch too. After some time, one of the cops and a detective approached me and asked me when I used to live there, and I was honest. After a little small talk that seemed like the detective was just trying to keep me calm, he then informed me that looking at the state of the body, as well as the lack of disturbance of the surrounding area, he knew that I had no part in his death or moving the body. He then mentioned he assumed it was probably a squatter or someone looking for a place to sleep, and that they most likely died of an overdose, as they didn't immediately see anything on the body. I think he may have felt sorry for me with the way he handled me, but I didn't care. I was successfully traumatized. I left my childhood home at the age of 14 unexpectedly. I returned just to reminisce, and instead, I was left worse off than what I was. He told me I was free to go and said that they would call if they had any further questions. I did go see Jess the next day, and yeah, I told her about what I did that night too. She was horrified for me, but also excited in a way. She actually quite enjoyed urban exploring, and I hadn't really thought about it at that point, but I guess it's kind of what I did. She suggested we go together sometime, promising me we wouldn't find any bodies. I was willing to do so, but not that time. That image stuck in my head for quite some time. I didn't like talking about bodies and watching related shows. It changes you when you see one in real life. I've definitely gotten a lot better now, where I don't get triggered from watching CSI, but I still hesitate when I go into abandoned places. My brother, we'll call him Frank, has been doing urbex or urban exploration for years now, and took me along with him to an abandoned school. Not to shit on the area, but the whole place looks straight out of Fallout 4 or any other apocalypse games. There are a lot of abandoned buildings, crime, and we'd have to watch our backs while we were there. I did a quick YouTube search, and there have already been videos posted of this location. We arrived by car, and he cleared up some rules. 1, the moment he says to leave, we get out of there immediately. 2, take nothing when we're in there. 3, if it looks unsafe to walk on, don't try it in case you fall through. And last but not least, 4, keep your mouth covered because black mold is dangerous. Without elaborating, he got out of the car with his GoPro ready, and we walked in through a side entrance. It was pretty dark, but with some of the windows broken, there was some light coming in. Seeing all the abandoned classrooms was pretty unnerving. Not in a kids could easily come back here right now way. It was too dirty and damaged for that. But out of the norm, everything had dirt on it. And we went into one room. He gestured for me to stop when we saw an old, disgusting mattress laying on the floor in the corner. There was garbage around in a bucket that I think would have been used as a toilet. We were curious but careful. Together, we walked to the mattress, and I saw another video of some boys in Brazil, I think, who found a dead body. We didn't. We found an old blanket, some food, and a backpack filled with random things. We agreed it was probably a homeless person, but with the amount of dust, they haven't been here for a long time. But why would they leave their backpack here and not take it with them? We continued down and went into the library. It was dark down here, and we needed to rely on light to see. There were still some shelves filled with dust-covered books, except a single corner, where there were a pile of burnt books that stained the walls with char. They could have used it during the winter to try to keep warm. Frank and I left until we came to another room when we heard shouting and people running through. He put his finger up, gesturing for me to be quiet, and we hid until the noise died down. We couldn't go back the same way we came, so we had to find a different way out. We went down the hallway and found a pile of cards. We thought they were just old student IDs that were left behind, but they were social security cards, driver's licenses, and other important information that people wouldn't willingly leave behind. We looked at each other and found a pile of old clothing, different sizes, men's and women's clothing, bras and panties, and some pieces were covered in blood. Some were dark brown and others a lighter shade of red. Strangely, there were no shoes, and I found one thing that scared me. A baby onesie with a blood stain on the chest along with a hole. I nearly started screaming, and he had to give me a shake to get me to shut up. He pointed for us to leave, and after seeing this, he didn't need to tell me. We opened the door, and seeing the sun outside felt like stepping out of hell. I tried to talk to him, and we ran toward the car, getting in and driving away to escape. When he sped away, I saw a group of people watching us through the windows, and it made the experience all the more terrifying. We stopped at a gas station, and he called the police to tell them what we had seen. I was still shaking and looking out the windows to make sure we weren't followed. Were they murder victims or people who were trafficked? I don't know. The whole place gives me the creeps, and now I don't want to go back somewhere dangerous like that again. Frank wants to go back to see if the evidence is still there. He tried looking up the names of some of the pieces of ID, but it was too water damaged or blurry to see the faces or names properly. So maybe there is a chance they could be missing people, but if their ID is there, where are they? And who would leave that behind? Anyways, I hope you enjoy it, Raven. Take care.
Hey, so let me tell you about the time my friends and I made the worst decision ever. We were obsessed with investigating cemeteries and creepy places, but this one, it still gives me the chills. There's this old abandoned house right next to one of the cemeteries we used to visit, and of course, we had to check it out. So, we get there, and the first thing that hits us is the smell. It's like something died in there, and probably did. But, we were 16 and stupid. So instead of running away like normal people, we went inside. I don't even know what we were thinking. The house was exactly what you'd expect. Dark, dusty, and creepy. The floor creaked with every step, and there was this huge pentagon on the floor. And on the ceiling, too. It was like someone had been practicing some weird rituals. None of us had ever seen symbols like the ones drawn all over the place. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and my EMF meter, it was going off like crazy. I knew something was wrong right then, but instead of leaving, we kept going deeper into the house. Jake pulled out the spirit box, and the moment it crackled to life, we all froze.
Help. I'm trapped. Help me.
The voice was faint, but clear enough. It felt like whoever or whatever was speaking was right there with us. My gut was screaming at us to get out of there. But then, Kyle being Kyle had to act all tough. He wanted to check it out. Of course, to show off. Probably thought he would win me over or something, which, spoiler alert, he didn't. He started heading down these old wooden stairs into the basement, and with every step he took, I just got more and more creeped out. His chances with me were basically vanishing each step. I mean, I wanted to yell at him, "Don't go," but he was already halfway down, and then when he reached the bottom, we heard him go, "What the hell?" He'd found these hooks hanging from the ceiling. You know, the kind that are used to hang cows or something. And there was old dried blood underneath. That's when I knew we were way out of our path. Kyle was halfway through the basement when we heard him mutter, "What is that?" He stopped, shining his flashlight on the ground. His foot had hit something. I couldn't see from where I was standing, but I knew by the tone of his voice that it wasn't good. He crouched down, and that's when I heard him say, "It's a knife. I think it's covered in blood." My heart dropped, and I yelled, "Don't touch that. Whatever you do, don't touch it. That's evidence. We've got to call the cops." I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He wanted to be the hero, but even Kyle wasn't that dumb. He backed away from it, and I felt a small wave of relief. We got out of there after that. I mean, we weren't even supposed to be in that house in the first place, but we couldn't just leave that knife behind. We had to tell someone. So we called the cops, gave them a vague story, and then got out of there as fast as we could. I kept hoping they would figure out whose blood it was. Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a person. Maybe it was some kind of sacrifice. I don't know, a rat, maybe? Poor rat. 2 days later, we actually went back. This time was during the day. We were curious, you know? We wanted to see what that creepy house looked like in the daylight. But when we got there, there was no house left to see. Just a pile of ashes. It was still kind of smoking a little, like the fire had only just finished. I stood there staring at the ruins, trying to make sense of it. The house, the knife, everything was gone. And as we poked around in the ashes, we found something strange. A single tarot card. I flipped it over, and wouldn't you believe it, it was the death card. Out of all the cards it could have been, it just had to be that one. Now, I know a little bit about tarot. I've read enough to understand that the death card doesn't always mean something bad. It can be a sign of transformation, a new beginning. So, I like to think that maybe if there was a spirit trapped in that house, they're free now. Maybe the fire was their way out. I hope so, anyway, because our spirit box actually stayed silent the second time. So that, my friends, was a collection of some terrifying, scary Urbex stories. Urbex is urban exploration, if you don't know. Guess I should have explained that prior to the video. Some people may get mad about that. That's a joke for those in the know, which is nobody. Anyways, scary Urbex stories, urban exploration, abandoned buildings, however you want to look at it. Creepy stuff. I've never really gone urbexing. Patience and I have never really, gone to an abandoned building. And I'm not just saying that for, legal purposes. We've never really done that. Would I be interested in doing that? Yes. That sounds like something that could be entertaining. So, I don't know. Maybe someday. We have a few near us. Maybe someday. All that said, friends, hopefully you enjoyed today's video, today's stories, and the narrations by my lovely other half, Patience, or Marie's Field of Nightmares. If you want to check out her channel, it's linked down below. It's Marie's Field of Nightmares. Much like me, she also does take submissions, stories to be submitted to her that she can narrate. Just go to Marie's Field, MariesField.com, and it's a Google Doc, it's a Google Forms, so you can just send in your story pretty easily, just type it up and it's good to go. Of course, if you ever send a story to me and you want her to narrate it as well, just put at the end of the story, Marie can narrate the story as well, or Patience is allowed to narrate this, and I'll let her know and send it over to her so she can narrate it for a video. You don't have to do that. It's never expected. It's just one of those things where if you don't mind it or you want it to happen, she will narrate it. You know, because she's fun. She likes doing this too. I never expected her to get into it, but she definitely has. And she just hit 2,000 subscribers, which is amazing. Congrats to her. Fantastic job, love. Always a pleasure. Thank you all for listening to this point. If you did, please do hit the like button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing. Then go over to Marie's Field of Nightmares, give her a sub as well. Check out some of her stories and her videos. She does a great job, like I said. The channel art may look a little familiar, the thumbnails and such. I make them. I do the channel art for her. It's just a thing. You can also leave a comment down below with your thoughts. How you're doing. How you are doing this week. I don't know what I was trying to say there. How your week's going. What you have planned. Anything you'd like to hear. Stuff like that. Yeah. Order signed posters down at the coffee link below. That's KOFI. Join Patreon and membership to get early access to content like this. Listen on other platforms such as Spotify, Audible, Apple Podcast, etc. And that's about it. All that said, friends, hope you're having a beautiful week and hope I do see you again here very soon. But until then, remember that you are loved, that you are valid, that you are important. You are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Until next time, my friends, much love, take care, and sleep well.